Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
Tonight's presentation is Extending Operational Life of Facilities and Reducing Surveillance and Maintenance Requirements. Bill McMillan is our presenter this evening. Bill is a professional federal project director for the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management, with the responsibility for overseeing all environmental management cleanup, decontamination, decommissioning, waste storage, and disposal operations at Oak Ridge National Lab. Bill has been with DOE for more than 30 years and joined the Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management in 1995. Since coming to OREM, Bill has performed program and project management activities for low-level waste disposition, transuranic waste characterization and disposition, disposition of uranium-233, and various remediation and construction activities. Bill's career has included 5 years with DOE Y-12 National Security Complex Site Office, 3 years with the Savannah River Operations Office, and 5 years with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. Bill has a Master of Science degree in Environmental Systems Engineering from Clemson University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the College of Charleston. He lives in Oak Ridge with his wife, Kathy, and has 2 grown sons. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here again tonight. It's been, I don't know, several months, I guess, since I was before the board presenting on something. I don't remember what it was last time. But tonight we're going to talk about some of the things we're doing at the lab. We've got operational facilities and surveillance and maintenance excess facilities that we're doing things to reduce risk and try to lower our surveillance and maintenance costs. So we'll talk about that tonight. Like I said, there's various types of both operational activities and excess facility types of activities at the lab. Operational being operating waste treatment systems. We call it the LGWO. That stands for Liquid and Gaseous Waste Operations. That system treats all of the liquid and gaseous waste from both Office of Science activities as well as EM legacy contaminated groundwater. Some of the exhaust from the old buildings that are still there are still served by the gaseous system to ensure ventilation and filtration of the gases out of those. And it's important to support science operations at the lab as well as our own activities. And then we also have various types of facilities that are in standby, awaiting D&D. Research reactors, old research reactors that had been defueled years ago. The reactor building is still there, and the reactor shell is still there. And we have to maintain those facilities in a safe condition for standby. Similarly, isotope production facilities have hot cells that have residual materials in them. And various associated support facilities that are, more like maintenance warehouses and old storage buildings and things like that we maintain. So what's shown in the picture is, all these red buildings are basically EM excess facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing in some of them and I guess at the conclusion of the briefing, I've got a kind of an optimistic viewpoint of slides that things getting ready to happen. So I'll start first talking about the liquid gaseous waste operations. There's basically 3 treatment facilities all in that one organization, I guess. It's it's a program, I guess, to manage all the waste. There's 3 facilities. The liquid low-level waste system is a facility that manages the more radioactive wastewaters that are collected primarily today from the HIFER operations of the Office of Science, as well as some contaminated groundwater sources and discharges from the gaseous waste scrubber, the off-gas system, all contribute to the liquid low-level waste system. It consists of an evaporator facility where those waters go. The water is evaporated off and leaving the residuals in a sludge type of format. The sludge is stored currently and safely stored in vaults and stainless steel double-lined tanks. And the mission in the future is to process that sludge for disposal. We're getting ready to build a sludge processing facility here in the next few years that will do that for us. The process waste system, it handles more of the everyday, day-to-day wastewaters, some of the contaminated groundwater, which is lightly contaminated, some of the waters from the Office of Science operations that are also lightly contaminated, if any, as well as some of the storm water that collects in basements and things like that. So it's all. It also receives waste from the leachate collection at the landfill. It's trucked in from other sites in some cases to be treated here, to be treated at the process waste system. And it processes about 80 to 100 million gallons of water a year. The gaseous waste system is basically the stack. It's a central stack in the lab. If you've been out to the lab, you're certainly familiar with the big brick stack. It's the one right in the middle of the lab, 250 feet tall or so. And you can see the bottom of the picture here, a lot of the fans and blowers that bring the air from excess facilities around the central portion of the lab to be filtered in the HEPA filtered there and scrubbed with the off-gas system. And then the gases are ejected out of the stack. I think the number is like 1.3 million cubic feet per day goes out the stack. The photos here, I mentioned the evaporator facility. That's the liquid low-level waste and the process waste. This is building 3608. There's actually another building that's about right here, if you had to extend that photo, called 3544 that I'll talk about a little bit, and it's one of the older parts of that plant. So we've got some things going on that will help us get away from that building that I'll talk about in just a minute. So all these systems are operating within their permits, operating safely, but we are experiencing a lot of increased maintenance activities at these sites because they are getting old. You know, the newest facilities were built in the late 80s and early 90s and installed. And so that's pushing 30 years old now and getting past their design life. You know, piping, we're seeing corroding piping and those kinds of things that indicate facilities that are getting beyond their design life. Increasing frequent and significant non-routine maintenance, i.e., pipes leak, they break. We have pumps that fail, electrical switches that fail, things like that are becoming more and more frequent. And it's getting hard to find replacement parts for a lot of it. One of the examples I'll talk about in a minute is the motor control centers, which is some of the switch gears for the electric switching of the electric feeds to the different parts of the plant. But it's getting hard to get replacement parts, so they need to be upgraded. Costs have increased over the last 3 or 4 years. We've increased the cost for maintenance in general at the lab by about $8 million a year. And for some of the things to address liquid gaseous waste operations, upgrades and repairs has been an additional $5 to $10 million in the last few years for some of the upgrades that I'm getting ready to talk about. Once these increases in maintenance needs started becoming a reality about 4 or 5 years ago, we decided to take off and do some engineering evaluations of the facilities, and we did that in 2 phases. The first phase focused on the LGWO infrastructure. It was done and completed in, I think, January of 2016, so very early in 2016. It looked at the current conditions of all three of those facilities systems that I talked about on the first slide, and made some recommendations for how to consolidate, how to right size, if that's the right word. I've used that word a lot. Right size and make life extension improvements to those facilities to hopefully help them last another 30 years into the future. Phase 2 was just completed, and it focused more on the piping systems, the underground piping. It really we did a lot of video inspections of some of the underground pipelines to confirm that they weren't leaking or were still in good integrity. And it also looked at a lot of the electrical systems associated with the process waste treatment center itself. There's also been produced a key summary that we have. It's about an 8 or 10 page summary document and a long-term strategic plans of the recommendations out of those engineering studies that is a good summary information. But it talks about the upgrade and maintenance items and things that we would like to tackle and make sure get evaluated well in the next 3 to 4 years. So out of those engineering evaluations, we identified several things that we needed to do to the facilities. And so a lot of those have been underway for quite some time. I mentioned the increased budget we put towards some of these activities over the last 2 to 3 years. But all of these initiatives are intended to put more modern equipment in that's easier and provides more efficient operations, makes it more reliable from an operational viewpoint, ensures the facilities can last longer into the future to serve the lab and the cleanup needs as we go. So a lot of those have been finished already. The heat trace control panels, those were a lot of obsolete switch gears and systems for ensuring our pipes don't freeze. So that was to address the obsolescence of that equipment, and those panels have been replaced now at all the facilities. We had at the process waste treatment plant, there was an air stripper that was put in back when it was built, and I think it was needed early on, but over the last several years, we found that air stripper was not really needed, and we never used it. And so we got permission from the state to approve the removal of that air stripper, and that makes room for installing new equipment out there that we have put in place. The evaporator over at the liquid low-level waste system has a couple of cooling towers, and we had one of those cooling towers was out of service because of leaks in the pipes that feed that cooling tower. So we repaired the piping that feeds the cooling tower to make it available for use now. So that was completed. Several things underway that are very important, and these are a little bit bigger types of items than the first three. The motor control center replacements. The motor control centers, for those who might not know, are basically the big circuit panels. Big. If you go into the facility and if you come out for a tour, I'm sure you're going to want to tour some of this, but there's a wall about the size of that wall over there that's just full of big circuit breaker boxes, switch gear. And all of that was old equipment that's outdated and obsolete now, and you can't get replacement parts for them. So there's been a big activity underway to provide new feeds into that system and to replace, they call each one of those panels, they call a bucket. So they're going to be replacing all those buckets and modernizing the motor control centers. That has been completed at the liquid low-level waste system at the evaporator facility. And it's almost, I'd say within the next 2 weeks, we should be making the final tie-ins to that system at the process waste system as well. The granular activated carbon columns, GAC stands for granular activated carbon. Those are columns, carbon is used for removing any trace organics out of the final water. Those columns were basically breaking down. We had a lot of carbon being washed out into the wastewater. So we knew we had to replace those columns with some new ones. And I've got some pictures of these things here in a minute. So that replacement, those columns have been replaced. They're pretty good size pieces of equipment. There's 3 of them. They've been replaced and they have been connected to the plant. They're undergoing test and checkout right now for turnover to operations here in the next couple of weeks also. The dual media filters is basically sand bed filters that are also part of the process waste treatment system. Those, similar to the carbon columns, were failing. The media was washing out into the water, into the wastewater train, and so they needed to be completed or replaced as well. And then obviously there's a lot of piping associated with those 2 systems that have been replaced because of some leaks and things like that, just integrity of the piping that was questionable and failing pretty frequently. So all that addresses failed equipment and provides operational longevity with new systems that provide that treatment. Dike repairs, the facilities were built back in, like I said, in the 80s or earlier. And, the tanks around the system and so forth have concrete culvert dikes around them. They had cracks, and they had in some cases, some pretty significant cracks with plants growing up in the cracks and things like that. So all that is a potential for release to the environment if you have a spill within the dike. So we are underway. We've finished some of those dikes at one of the pump facilities that has some of the big tanks over in the Melton Valley side. And we're getting ready in the next year or 2 to complete the dike repairs on the Bethel Valley side as well. It ties into some of the other projects that we're working inside the dike, so we want to get the other projects completed before we finalize the final dike repair on that. The zeolite system, I mentioned building 3544 a minute ago, which is the older part of the process waste system. That facility is where we currently have ion exchange and zeolite systems to remove the radionuclides from the water. It was proven back in 2010-ish time frame, 2008 or 2010, that we did actually a bench study on zeolite and its ability to remove both cesium and strontium from the water, which is our primary radionuclides that we have to treat. It was proven that it was very effective at doing that. And so several years passed because of funding constraints, but we're finally replacing that zeolite system down at the old plant and relocating it up to the process waste treatment plant at 3608, which is the newer part. And that allows us to consolidate all the operations up at the newer part of the facility, and will allow us ultimately to get away from building 3544 and shut that whole facility down. So I think that'll be a very good advantage toward eliminating one of the pieces of infrastructure that we currently have a lot of maintenance going on to maintain it. Then we got some other things planned. One of the things, this pretreatment of feeds to the liquid low-level waste system is a very high priority for us. We've implemented or are implementing the contract changes and adjustments with UCOR to install this system. Basically, it will accept wastewater from building the basement of the collection tanks at building 3517, which tend to be some of our most contaminated groundwater and has historically been fed to the evaporator, as well as the scrubber water that comes from the off-gas scrubber up at the 3039 stack, or the big red brick stack system. Those 2 components actually constitute over half of the feed to the liquid low-level waste evaporator. So we have at the evaporator facility, I show here extend storage capacity for sludge. We have the sludge project that I mentioned earlier was originally forecasted to be online probably 10 years ago. And for reasons and budget reasons and contractual reasons and things like that, that has slipped, as Christoph is well aware of, with our site treatment plant milestones that we have negotiated every year. So until that facility is online, we're maintaining the sludge in storage, and the capacity for that is starting to run out. And so putting this pretreatment system in and eliminating that source of feed to the evaporator will actually buy us 9 more years of capacity and allow that sludge treatment system to come online. So that's a high priority for us to get done. And then the distributed control system, that's the electronics, basically the computer panels that they can sit and operate the entire system from. That's all obsolete. I think it's still on a Windows 7 type of a format. So it's obsolete equipment and it needs to be upgraded as well. So that'll help improve the longevity of the facility as well. So here's some photos. Kind of hard to see with the lights on in here, but this photo here shows some of every time we take heat tracing off of pipes, we find this kind of thing. You can see all the rust and corrosion here on these systems that cause us to have to go in and replace pipes, and so that's been more and more frequent. This shows some of the internals of a pipe that came out of the clarifier, I think, or bottom of the clarifier with corrosion and buildup of corrosion products on the inside of the pipe. Basically, this was a pretty good leak. And most leaks aren't nearly that major, but this was a major one that pipe broke from corrosion problems. And this actually is over at the off-gas system where we have good many steam leaks in some of the piping systems up there. So all of that is things that need to be addressed in a corrective maintenance mode, and it has been pretty difficult keeping up with some of the things that we've encountered and get that taken care of. But they've been able to keep up with it and have upgraded a lot of the piping systems, as I'll show you. Here's one of them. This piping and valve system here was one of the major headers between, I think that's one of the clarifiers in the back, or at least one of the influent tanks. These pipes, they had a leak or something that caused them to remove the heat tracing or heat jackets, insulation jackets on the outside, and we found a severe corrosion in these. You see the new system that was put in place, and it's a whole. This picture doesn't show this top header, but this was all part of it up here too. And it's down in the middle of all the plants and systems, all the tanks, and involved cranes to lift it out. It was a pretty hefty job to get that taken care of. But just one of the success stories over the last year or so to replace that header system. This is some of the dike repairs. This picture here is actually the before picture of this one. You can see the difference between it's hard to see, but some of the cracks right through here and right through there, a lot of the cracks, and they've all been repaired and reseated and resealed and coating with a new epoxy coating that'll will stand several years more of operations there. This is the granular activated carbon columns. The old columns there, pretty good size. They had to be cut out and removed and replaced with the new ones. This is one of the columns coming off the truck bed, and then all three of them replaced and installed. I mentioned the sand filters. I don't have another picture. This is just kind of an afterthought, but back here in the back is a shot of one of the sand filters that I mentioned. There's two of the dual media sand filters back here in the background that are side by side. So all that system has been replaced. The sand filters are actually sitting where the old air stripper used to be. But those are all in place now, and the sand filters are operational, and they're getting ready to go operational on the GAC columns. This is the motor control panel. The old system is down here, but this was actually taken a few weeks ago. You can see where the new cabling is coming in. This is outside the facility. The new cable and conduits come in, and there's a new distribution center that's been put in there where all that feed comes in and it gets distributed into the facility where it comes into this conduit here, and this will be tied into all the circuits. But it's these buckets that are now undergoing replacement with new buckets. They do that in a couple of phases, and of course it involves plant outages when they do this, so they pretty much have to shut down the whole operation to make those connections. So that's a major importance to the electrical feeds to the system and ensuring that we don't have problems from the electrical standpoint. This is actually over in the off-gas system. Back last June, I don't know how many may have heard of this or not, but the blower system that serves the off-gas system has been that the fans were powered by a steam turbine system. And if you can look right there, last June, we had one of those steam turbines through a blade, and it ejected it outside of the turbine, so shut down that whole blower. This is the motor right here, or this is the blower right here that it drives. So we've replaced that system with new motors. Because of the emergency situation, the motors were first put in with just an on-off, but we're also upgrading those motors to go variable speed drives to ensure they last longer. But the other systems that are similar with the steam turbines, we're also looking at upgrading those with motors and getting away from the steam turbines because of the age on them. Okay, so that pretty much covers a lot of the stuff we're doing at liquid and gaseous waste operations. Been a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff to be done there as well. Switching gears to the molten salt reactor experiment. We went and parked a bunch of 1960s vehicles out there just for this picture. I don't know where they came up with the picture, but it's one of the old ones, I guess, from back in the day. This reactor system was shut down in 1969. If you know anything about MSRE, it was operated on molten salt technology, which basically had a hot salt fluid, fluoride salt solution that carried the reactor materials through the reactor. And the fuel was part of that molten salt. And it was recirculated and so forth. Well, about 10 years ago, the reactor was shut down and all the salts were drained into 2 fuel drain tanks, and then the system was flushed for residuals into a fuel flush tank. And then that is solidified, is basically rock hard in those tanks. But because of the fission products in the salts and the fact that there were, by the way, this is not hydrogen fluoride gases, fluorine gases. Couldn't make that correction before y'all got the slides. But because of the fission products and the radiolysis reactions going on, radiolytic reactions going on with the fluoride gases are produced in those tanks. And every 6 months, we have to go in and pump those tanks down through a gaseous treatment system to remove the fluorides and also to remove any residual uranium from it. So that really requires a whole operation within MSRE just to maintain that facility. So current surveillance and maintenance activities focus on that periodic pump down. It occurs about every 6 months. More or less, and we watch the pressures. We have controls to keep the pressures below atmospheric so that if there's leaks, they don't come out. And so that kind of drives when we're going to do the pump downs. To when the pressures are reaching close to 14, we have to pump it down. And then the reliability of electrical systems. Back about a year and a half ago, it was June, I think about February of last year. A year ago, there was a lot of rain, and the sump pumps actually in the basement failed. And before we knew it, the basement was filling up with water and flooded the basement of the facility. And they went to try to isolate the power to the sump pump so they could get down and repair them, and they couldn't find where all the power was coming from. So just the age of the facility and the lack of good electrical drawings from the day when they were built gives us a lot of unreliable electric circuitry and don't know where it's coming from. So we're doing some things to address that with a project called the electrical layup, which I'll talk about, I think, right away. So at MSRE, doing things to simplify the S&M operations, improve the reliability of the systems, important to safety, and reduce our activities in that building. Okay, so replacing electrical system for critical components. So the electrical layup that I mentioned just a minute ago is basically going to run a whole new electrical circuit through the facility to feed just those systems that are really important to safety and critical for the operation. Things like the ventilation system, the off-gas system, the gaseous removal system, fire protection systems, lights, those types of things that we have to have in this facility to make sure it stays operational and safe. And then once we've repowered all those, then the rest of the facility will be shut down from an electrical standpoint. We'll disconnect it from the feeds, and that way we have good control over what knowledge we have about the electrical systems and how it affects work that goes on in there. Improving the sump pump systems to eliminate flooding concerns. Those systems, back when we had the flooding in the basement, we replaced the pumps. But some of the circuitry and the panels that control those pumps were not replaced, so we're going to go ahead and finish that as well. Those pumps are operating fine today. So somebody asked the question in our office the other day, do we really need to do anything more? But yeah, we need to upgrade those circuits that control those pumps to make sure they're going to not fail on us. We're looking at things to do about the fluorine gas generation in the tanks. And one of the things we're looking at is installing new pipes that would exhaust the gases from these 3 tanks. These are the fuels. These 2 are the fuel salt drain tanks, and this one is the flush tank. And they're all down in this was back when they built it, by the way. It's not open today, but this is where the salt is and where the gas comes from. And so we're going to put a continuous ventilation system on there where we can draw off those tanks and backfill with argon like we do today in the pump downs, except do it continuously. And that way we can do it with an automated system and continuously route it through the traps that trap the fluorine gas and exhaust it on a continuous basis and get away from all the pressure monitoring and activities that we have to do to monitor and do that on a frequent basis. Reduce facility infrastructure. That's not tearing facilities down, but that's basically maintaining the high bay part of the facility, moving people out of the office buildings that are there since they won't need to be day-to-day in the facility anymore. We'll move them to some trailers and they can go out and support future D&D or D&D actions at other parts of the plant. And we'll be using a remote monitoring system for the plant as well as daily walk-ins to the building to confirm everything is safe and operating as it's supposed to. So that will reduce the personnel load at the site, reduce all the infrastructure, maintenance of the infrastructure. We'll basically go cold and dark on the rest of the infrastructure, and we won't have to do a lot of the things from a fire protection standpoint to maintain it and be able to kind of walk away, not physically forever walk away from the facility, but from a day-to-day operational standpoint, we'll be able to get away from that and lower our costs for S&M there. Okay, so some of the other things we're doing, and this is where we start the good news story because we are starting to do some work in the central part of the campus on getting ready for D&D activities. So we've started some deactivation activities on the reactor facilities that are up kind of in the central campus area near the graphite reactor, if you're familiar with the plant. We've got the building 3010, which is called the bulk shielding reactor, still has a water pool in it that shields some of the activated metal that are still in the pool. And so right now we're undergoing deactivation activities in there to prepare that facility for ultimate demolition here in the next few years. So right now the goal is that we've taken all the combustible material out. We've done the asbestos abatement in the building. And we're working now hard on the characterization of the items and the metal in the pool to assess it for contamination, so we know what contamination levels are in the pool. And frankly, there's very little contamination. It's just activated metal. So and we're actually getting postage stamp samples of that activated metal, analyze them in the lab to make sure we know what it's made up of so we can determine the disposition path. And then the clean out of that pool will proceed as the next step, where we'll cut that metal up and remove it from the pool and dispose of it out west. Similar to what we did in the Oak Ridge Research Reactor three or 4 years ago. We had some items in that pool that we cleaned out as well. Once the metal is out, we can drain the pool and then we can be ready for demolition of the building. So we think that the characterization and clean out is probably about a year or so in the project schedule, and then hopefully we'll be ready to go into demolition after a couple more years. 3026 building is an old hot cell facility. The building itself was taken down back in Recovery Act, or actually prior to Recovery Act days. If you've been to the site, and many of you have, you've seen the big gray monolithic structures that look like they're out there on the pad. So we're finally getting to where we can proceed with the deactivation and demolition of the remaining structures on that pad. So that consists of legacy material removal from the pad and from inside the buildings, doing the characterization and deactivation of the 3 remaining facilities that are on that pad. There's a storage cell they call the West Cell that was basically had equipment in it and was used in conjunction with the hot cell. The East Hot Cell is the another building that's out there that does have hot cell equipment in it, and leftover materials in the hot cell that have to be removed, and an interconnecting tunnel that was used to shuttle equipment back and forth between the two. So undergoing the characterization and deactivation of those 3 facilities, and then demolition will be planned for that after the characterization is completed. We're also looking at starting similar activities in the low-intensity test reactor building, Building 3005, and the Oak Ridge Research Reactor. All of those facilities are all up there in the same general 100 square foot footprint of the lab, 100 foot square footprint of the lab, and are important. I think when we worked with the Office of Science to identify the priorities, 2 reasons for starting with these facilities. One is the National Historic Park use of the graphite reactor, opening that up to access to the public, so it opens that area up so they have access to the graphite reactor. And also because the reactors, when we start talking about doing D&D of reactors and these reactor buildings versus some of the isotope facilities where the lab also has some priorities for that footprint, the isotope facilities are going to be probably a lot more difficult to do than these reactors. So this gives us a good cut your teeth type of activity to try to get some of these out of the way. First, it opens up some footprint where we'll have some laydown area for accomplishing the D&D in the isotope facilities. It meets some of the goals for the Office of Science to open up the graphite reactor. So I think the right choice was to work on the reactor hill. 3026 is also a priority for the lab because it's right down also where they have some mission needs for future development. So both of those serve a lot of missions, and we're well coordinated with the Office of Science to tackle these first. So here's some pictures. This is the 3026 footprint. You see the old foundation of the building. These buildings were actually inside of a larger building back in the day. The larger building was taken down in about 2008 or so. And then in Recovery Act, they started in 2010-11 timeframe. They started with a lot of the facilities on this pad, but they didn't get to these 2 because they found some materials that weren't expected in there from a safety basis standpoint. So had to stop that job at the time because there wasn't enough money to deal with it at that point. So it stayed in standby. This is actually a photo inside the interconnecting tunnel between these 2 buildings. This is the storage cell. This is the hot cell structure. Interconnecting tunnel kind of runs underneath the pad there, about 3 feet underground between the 2. And this is inside the tunnel. We monitor the water levels because it does collect some either groundwater or rainwater. And periodically we have to pump that water out to treatment. So that's what you see the scale there for, but that's just a shot. I wanted to give you it's about 3 feet by 4 feet dimensions on that tunnel. This is inside this west storage cell. You see some of the equipment that was in there. Looks like some pumps or maybe some shielded containers or something like that were in there. And then over here is the 3010 reactor, the bulk shielding reactor, with the pool that's inside of it. You can see the reactor was inside the pool in this facility. So a lot of these piping is associated with the reactor itself with the activated metal. So there's no fuel or anything left in it, but there's activated metal parts that have to be removed and cut out of there in order to drain the pool. So those actions are all underway. Here's the good news, I think. We are laying the foundation for getting started on cleanup at the lab. The photo here is similar to the one I had on the first slide with the red buildings being part of the EM footprint. The buildings that are shown in yellow, we've made some progress on. Molten salt reactor facility back here. This was the old homogeneous reactor experiment where a couple of years ago we actually did asbestos abatement called combustible material removal, and we've been able to go what we like to call cold and dark in that facility where it's, the power's been turned off, all the fire hazards have been removed, and it's checked, but no real activities have to go on in there anymore. 3517, we replaced the HEPA filters. That'll be one of the, I guess that's probably down the priority list a little bit just because of where it is. It's kind of off by itself. 3010, this is the reactor area that we're focused on right now. 3010 is this yellow building here. Next to it is 3005. That bigger one there is the graphite, is the Oak Ridge Research Reactor. And those two are next in line. This one is also on Science's hit list, although it's not one of our high priority excess facilities. It's up the hill a little bit, but that's the graphite. It has some support for the ventilation support for the graphite reactor here, and that's the graphite reactor right there. And then 3028 and 29 are a couple of the isotope row facilities. All this area right here is what we call isotope row, because there's a series of old isotope production facilities there that are kind of the next in priority. And I kind of put things in 5-year windows. I think these reactor facilities will be in the first 5 years, and then the isotope row area in the next 5 years, generally speaking. But, I mean, as ETTP actions wind down, we are actively moving into ORNL and Y12. Of course, at Y12, we're working on biology, and I think Brian Henry has probably talked to you guys about that. At ORNL, we're focusing now on some of the reactors and getting ready for implementing the same kind of actions in some of the other facilities. I think that's some positive stories and shows that we're trying to get over into ORNL. So I guess that's it. Any questions?
Bonnie?
On your waste disposition for the demolition facilities, I'm sure you've. Where do you send most of it? It's probably got fissionable material or tree waste.
Yeah, building rubble and so forth is destined to go to on-site disposal.
Okay.
High activity items, say we're emptying out cleaning out hot cells, all that goes out west, probably to Nevada.
Okay. So it's your landfill at the ORNL site?
Yes, for the reservation. Yeah, it'd be
okay.
the circle of landfills for the reservation.
Okay.
Other questions? I've got one for you.
Okay.
The sludge storage, is that, every time I think of sludge storage, I think of corrosion issues down the road, trying to pump tar out of a big tank. What are we looking at in the future as we put off to dealing with that sludge?
Yeah. So the sludges have accumulated over the last 30 or 40 years. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty good inventory. It's a couple thousand cubic meters of sludge that are in these series of tanks around the reservation, around ORNL. We know it's settled, so it's peanut butter-like. It looks peanut butter. So the engineers that are working the design of the sludge project have a lot of critical technologies to be tested as they build the design. Mm-hmm. So right now we have CH2M Hill is our contractor for the design. They have contracted out with some vendors to test some of the mobilization techniques for getting the sludge mobilized. We are getting ready this summer to build a test area adjacent to ORNL that will be used to test a lot of the other components for the continuous mixing systems and the solidification of the sludge, because the goal is to remove the sludge through a pulse jet type of an operation that exercises it while we blend it with the supernate that's also in the tank to get the weight percent down to about 5 weight percent. Okay. And hopefully we can do that enough to make it, start mobilizing it, and then we'll pump it into 25,000-gallon tanks that will keep it completely mixed while we get good characterization information on it, and then feed it in with a grout mixture to solidify it and send it out to Nevada.
Okay.
So that's the goal. So, but there's a lot of testing over the next few years on the technologies that go into that before we start building the final design.
Quite a few of the other sites have the same issues with sludge. There's some cross-learning?
There is. Been a lot of lessons learned. We've had a lot of, especially with Hanford and Savannah River, we've had a lot of sessions with both experts from them, subject matter experts that have been involved with those projects to help us with ours. The sludges here has some different qualities than what they're dealing with in Hanford.
Yep.
But there's enough similarities to get a lot of good lessons learned from all that.
Okay, very good. Other questions? Oh, Fred, sorry.
Yeah, on your gaseous waste stack, the HEPA filters, what type of routine maintenance and monitoring you do on the HEPA filters? Make sure they're working like they're supposed to.
Yeah, there's of course, we watch differential pressures across the filters, and then they take about every 10 years they have to be changed out. So that's kind of the frequency of changing out the filters themselves, and that was done, I want to say 3 years ago at the big stack. So, and then of course the maintenance is relatively simple. It's basically watching the differential pressures and measuring flow rates through the filters. And when the differential pressures start climbing, that's when you know you got a loaded filter to be fit to separate, to change out.
I got another question for you on the molten salt reactor. Wasn't that what Jay was talking about, and we got a plus up this year for the work that you did in the molten salt reactor?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I meant to mention it. But, you know, every time I do one of these briefings, I bring my talking points and I never look at them. But yeah, we did had to plus up the budget for MSRE as well. We added $5 million a year for a number of years into our budget plans to accomplish some of these S&M types of things that we're doing, and we're using that money for that. You know, the operating budget for MSRE is buried. It's part of the overall S&M budget at about $20 to $25 million a year, just for S&M over the EM facilities at ORNL, and that's not including LGWO operation. Anyway, we had to, because of the additional needs for MSRE, we had to plus that budget up. So we've added $5 million a year to accomplish these things we're trying to do.
Okay.
Similar with LGWO, you know, we've had to plus that budget up too. I think I mentioned that we increased it to accomplish these life extension activities.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other questions from the public?
I think I dropped the thing out here.
The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
Okay. Jessalyn?
The public comment period is now open. Luther Gibson. Please state your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
I'll try to stay at 3 minutes. I'm Luther Gibson. I was a member of the board from 1999 to 2005 and board chair from 2001 to 2002. I've got 4 points to make tonight. First, regarding the recent discussions about mercury in East Fork Poplar Creek and the aquatic ecology research being done by Dr. Mark Pearson's group. His presentation discussed sorbent studies using things like activated carbon fiber mats as remediation technology. That was in the middle of the presentation, and it may have been overshadowed as the presentation moved into ecological manipulation. After the committee meeting, I had a nice email exchange with Mark, and he convinced me that he is very aware of research being done elsewhere on technologies that could be applied here as in situ remedies. I don't know if it's fair to say we're in a wait-and-see mode until Merck Treatment Facility comes online, but there may be things doable in the meantime to more actively and less passively address the problem, and a recommendation could potentially include that. Okay, secondly, if you're interested in additional information beyond what you get in the presentations arranged for you by DOE, I'd like to draw your attention to an organization called the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, ITRC. Their website is itrcweb.org. They are a state-led working coalition with a mission to develop information resources that break down barriers to use of technologically sound, innovative technologies. You can go on their website and view guidance documents and slides from training presentations, as well as sign up for free web-based training. But you don't have to sign up for the training to view the materials. An example of how they might be useful is you might go on there and look at a presentation or a guidance document and see graphics to help you understand groundwater issues. When I was on the board, I would arrange some of the live training sessions to be accessed at the Dewey Information Center, and I would facilitate small group discussions, even submitting questions to speakers through online chat. At the time, a lot of us only had dial-up internet at home, and that was excruciating. Thirdly, I wish Mr. Mullis was here. Regarding the community budget workshop on May 15th, I would like to give DOE a heads up that some board members from the Coalition of Oak Ridge Retired Employees are planning to show up and may have some questions and comments on funding status and timing of contribution payments into the ETTP pension plan for grandfathered employees and the consideration that gets within the preparation process. And finally, the purpose of the community budget workshop, as I understand it, is to for input to the prioritization of FY 2021 projects, right, Dave? However, President Trump's FY 2020 budget for DOE shows approximately a $200 million decrease from 2019 to 2020, or approximately from $600 million to $400 million in the sum of the Defense Environmental and Uranium Enrichment D&D accounts for Oak Ridge. Now, I couldn't find exactly what the non-defense environmental allocation is for Oak Ridge, but I believe that's small compared to the two accounts. Although the party line probably is that appropriations will likely address the concern, this has to at least raise questions and probably should invoke a review of the board's recommendation on the 2020 priorities against this breaking news. Thank you.
Thank you, Luther. Other questions?
Are there any other members of the public who want to comment? Okay. As a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Thank you, Ghislaine. This concludes the public portion of the meeting. If you want to stick around for normal board activities, you're more than welcome. Belinda?
We neglected to thank Bill McMillan for his presentation.
Oh, yeah.
And he needs to come back so we can say thank you.
Good catch, Belinda. I think so. Are there any additions to the agenda for this evening? I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Belinda? Second? Bonnie seconded? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your right hand. The next meeting is Wednesday, June 12th. It'll be the excess contaminated facilities update is the topic. And there'll be a little bit focused with Baker, Shields, and Swidner as the issue group leaders. Moving on to board business. Richard, minutes.
Excuse me. I've looked at the minutes from our last meeting, and believe they are a fair and accurate description of everything that took place, and I would ask for a motion to approve.
So moved. Take a vote for approval of the meetings from March by raising your right hand. It's unanimous, Shelley. Thank you. Dr. Brooke.
Oh. Absence. I am still trying to get hold of Brooks. I will send her an email and hopefully hear back from her this week.
Okay. Thank you.
The next topic is the site-specific advisory board recommendations, or at least what we're covering at the chairs meeting, which is coming up. You'll see there on the left the recent activities, which include some bullet points under public outreach, continuous learning, and recommendations. Those are topics we've covered throughout the year, and if there's further conversation about those, we can entertain some discussion. For the FY 2020 priorities, we have included some information that is planned for presentation at the meeting, and we've broken this down into 4 areas really of priority: encouraging acceleration of mercury remediation technology research, specifically targeting any extra funding toward OR&L research partnerships, supporting potential test and demonstration projects, and scheduling regular updates to the SSAB. Ensuring future waste disposal capacity, really just making sure that the capacity is what we need. The timelines are adjusted to create optimal overlap between the new facility's operation and the closure of the current facility, and then securing adequate funding for future cleanup activities. Excess facilities disposition, continuing the planning and implementation of upfront activities, removing and decontaminating equipment, developing access plans to establish safe pathways and strengthen major structural sections, and then the redirection of any funding plus-ups for upfront activities. And then finally, support off-site groundwater monitoring. We're going to continue off-site groundwater quality assessment focus, examining potential off-site plume migration pathways, and the potential update to the reservation groundwater model. These are the 4 areas that we have outlined for the 2020 priorities. Does anyone have any comments or suggestions or recommendations?
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.